Welcome to True Crime Echoes. Here we revisit stories of real crimes, not just to recount the facts, but to understand the people, the choices, and the consequences that echo for decades. Today's case is one that shocked America not only for the violence involved, but for the chilling reason the shooter gave when asked why she did it. Imagine a teenager, a rifle, and a Monday morning at an elementary school. What unfolded that day left a community broken and a single quote that still haunts us today. Chapter 1. The Ordinary Monday That Wasn't. I've always believed that Mondays are tough enough on their own. You wake up, drag yourself out of bed, and brace for the start of another long week. But imagine this, a Monday morning, kids gathering outside an elementary school laughing, tugging on backpacks waiting for the gates to open. Parents wave goodbye, teachers are just arriving, the day hasn't even really started. And then out of nowhere, gunfire breaks the air. Children scatter, screams echo, and the peaceful rhythm of a neighborhood is shattered in seconds. That Monday wasn't ordinary. It became infamous because of a 16-year-old girl named Brenda Spencer. She lived just across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego. And on January 29th, 1979, she picked up a rifle her father had given her for Christmas and began shooting at children and staff who were simply standing at the gate. What made this case so chilling wasn't just the violence, it was what Brenda said when asked why she did it. Her words were cold, casual, and unforgettable. "I don't like Mondays. This livens it up." That one sentence would echo for decades, turning Brenda Spencer into a name forever tied to senseless tragedy. And today we're going to peel back the layers of who she was, where she came from, and how a neglected teenager could carry out one of the most shocking school shootings in American history. Chapter 2. A Broken Home. To understand Brenda Spencer, you have to step back into her world long before that Monday morning. Brenda was born in 1962, and from the start her life was anything but stable. Her parents divorced when she was still very young, and instead of growing up in a warm, supportive home, she was left in the care of her father, Wallace. They lived in San Diego, right across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary School. On the surface, that might sound convenient, a child living across from a school, but inside their home, things were far from normal. There wasn't any real furniture, no cozy living room, no proper bedroom, just a single mattress on the floor. That was where Brenda and her father slept. The rest of the house was littered with empty beer cans, the silent testimony of Wallace's drinking. Her father wasn't much of a presence, even when he was physically there. He was often drunk, verbally abusive, and emotionally checked out. Brenda's mother, meanwhile, had moved on, remarried, and started another family. She wanted nothing to do with her daughter. Imagine being a child essentially invisible to both parents, ignored by your mother, and neglected by your father. That kind of loneliness seeps into your bones. At school, Brenda acted out. She didn't want to be there, and most of the time she wasn't. She skipped classes, hung around smoking cigarettes, bragging about using drugs and drinking. Teachers described her as a troublemaker, the kind of student who was always falling asleep in class, always stirring up problems. But when you look closer, that label of problem child was just a mask covering something deeper, pain that no one cared to notice. And yet, even in all that chaos, Brenda showed a spark of potential. She loved photography. She even won a Humane Society contest for one of her photos, a rare glimpse of what she might have become if her life had taken a different path. But any chance to nurture that talent was buried under neglect and abuse. Later, doctors would discover that Brenda had suffered a serious head injury as a child, damaging the temporal lobe of her brain, the part that helps us process sound and speech. It might explain some of her struggles at school, maybe even some of her behavior. But in the late 1970s, no one was looking at a troubled teen and asking about neurological damage. They just saw a rebellious girl, not a child, crying out for help. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. A broken home, absent parents, self-destructive habits, and a fragile mind left untreated. It was the kind of storm that, once set in motion, was almost certain to end in tragedy. Chapter 3. Warnings. Nobody heard. As Brenda got older, the cracks in her life became impossible to ignore, yet somehow the adults around her still managed to look the other way. By her mid-teens, she wasn't just the girl skipping school and sneaking cigarettes anymore. She was spiraling deeper into depression, and she was desperate enough to tell people about it. At a continuation school she attended, one staff member recalled how Brenda admitted she wanted to kill herself. Imagine hearing that from a 16-year-old. You'd expect her father to step in to get her the help she so clearly needed. But when the school reached out, Wallace dismissed it. He brushed it off as if it were nothing, said she wasn't depressed, told them to just do their job. But Brenda wasn't just talking. She was trying. She'd attempted suicide multiple times, overdosing on pills, drinking the alcohol her father left lying around. And every time she woke up still alive, she sank even deeper into hopelessness. In her mind, she couldn't do anything right, not even end her own life. Her behavior kept escalating. She shot out the windows of the elementary school across the street with a BB gun. She broke into houses, got herself arrested for burglary. By then, the system had stepped in and she was on probation. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered and the results were clear: Brenda was severely depressed. The recommendation: she needed to be admitted to a mental hospital. But there was a catch. Because she was underage, her father's consent was required. And once again, Wallace refused. Just like that, another chance to help her disappeared. By the end of 1978, Brenda was carrying the weight of loneliness, untreated depression, and anger that had been building for years. That Christmas, she told her father she wanted a radio. Something small, simple, just a connection to the world outside those walls. But instead, he gave her a .22 caliber rifle complete with a scope and 500 rounds of ammunition. Later, Brenda would say, "I asked for a radio, and he bought me a gun. I felt like he wanted me to kill myself." It was a gift that didn't just symbolize neglect. It was a weapon placed into the hands of a deeply unstable teenager. And with it, the storm inside Brenda was about to spill over. Chapter 4: The Monday Morning Shots. January 29th, 1979. It was a Monday morning in San Diego, and across the street from Brenda Spencer's house, Grover Cleveland Elementary was waking up to another ordinary school day. Children gathered at the gates, their backpacks bouncing as they ran around talking about cartoons, homework, maybe what was packed in their lunchboxes. The principal and a custodian stood nearby, ready to welcome the kids inside. It was a picture of innocence, routine, and safety. Inside her house, Brenda was awake but not preparing for school. She had decided she wasn't going that day. Instead, she reached for the rifle her father had given her just a month earlier. She sat by the window, positioned herself with a clear view of the schoolyard, and she took aim. The first shots rang out and chaos erupted. Children screamed, scattering in all directions, some falling to the ground, others running blindly for cover. One child went down, then another. Parents and teachers tried to shield the kids, but the bullets kept coming. The principal, trying to protect his students, was struck and killed. A custodian who rushed to help was also gunned down. In total, Brenda fired more than 30 rounds. 8 children were wounded. A police officer who responded to the scene was shot in the neck. The playground, a place that should have been filled with laughter, had become a war zone. And then came the moment that still shocks people to this day. During the standoff, a journalist managed to get Brenda on the phone and asked her why she was doing this. Her reply was chilling in its simplicity: "I don't like Mondays." This livens it up. 7 hours later, after barricading herself inside her home, Brenda finally surrendered. She walked out with the same casual attitude she had displayed over the phone, as though she hadn't just destroyed lives on the other side of the street. It's one thing to hear about violence, it's another to hear the reasoning, or the lack of it. Brenda's answer wasn't one of rage or revenge or even desperation. It was boredom. And that cold detachment is what turned this case into something unforgettable. Chapter 5: The Trial and the Sentence. When the shooting finally ended and Brenda Spencer surrendered, the weight of her actions came crashing down, not just on her, but on the entire community. A 16-year-old girl had killed 2 adults, wounded 8 children, and left a neighborhood traumatized. The question was no longer what happened, but what would justice look like? Even though Brenda was only 16, prosecutors decided to try her as an adult. The crimes were too severe, too deliberate to be handled in juvenile court. Brenda pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. It was clear she wasn't going home. Her sentencing was stark, 25 years to life in prison. For many, it still felt too light. After all lives had been lost, families broken, and a community scarred forever. But that was the system 25 years before she would even be eligible for parole. In prison, Brenda was diagnosed with epilepsy and severe depression conditions that were left untreated for years before her crime. With medication, her mental state improved, but the diagnosis only raised more questions. Could things have been different if she had gotten help sooner? If her father had agreed to the psychiatric treatment? If someone had truly listened when she said she was suicidal? But those questions didn't undo the reality. 2 people were dead, children had been shot, and Brenda was responsible. She was sent to the California Institution for Women in Chino, a place where she would spend decades reflecting on, or perhaps avoiding, the consequences of her actions. The trial might have ended quickly, but the story of Brenda Spencer was far from over. Because in the years that followed, new claims, new explanations, and new controversies would emerge every time her name appeared before a parole board. Chapter 6. Parole Confessions and Controversy. Time passed, but Brenda Spencer's name never disappeared. After her conviction, she settled into prison life, but the case resurfaced every time her eligibility for parole came around. In 1993, she stood before a parole board for the first time. By then, she was no longer the 16-year-old girl with fiery red hair. She was a grown woman with years in prison behind her, and a story that seemed to have changed. At that hearing, Brenda made a shocking claim, one she had never mentioned before. She said her father had molested her for years, that the reason they slept on the same mattress wasn't poverty, but abuse. She described her home life as a constant cycle of trauma, and she insisted that on the day of the shooting, she was under the influence of a mix of pills, alcohol, and marijuana. According to her, she hadn't been trying to kill children at all. She had been trying to provoke the police into shooting her, a desperate attempt at what's sometimes called suicide by cop. The parole board didn't buy it. They pointed out that she had never raised these claims before, never mentioned abuse or drug use during her trial. The timing felt suspicious, and the credibility of her story crumbled under scrutiny. Her father, for his part, never openly denied the allegations, but he never admitted them either. The truth in many ways was left hanging in the air, uncertain and unproven. Over the years, Brenda's story shifted in small ways, but what never shifted was the pain of those she left behind. Every parole hearing became a reopening of wounds for the victims' families. The widow of the principal who died that day once recorded a message for the board pleading with them not to release Brenda. She described her home frozen in time, her husband's belongings untouched, a constant reminder of the life stolen from her. In 2009, Brenda was denied parole again, with the board citing her lack of genuine remorse. They noted how she deflected responsibility, how she never truly acknowledged the horror of what she had done. And still the hearings kept coming, each one dragging the victims' families back into the same pain, forcing them to relive that Monday morning. By 2019, Brenda was once again eligible for parole, older now, her story more complicated, her health more fragile. But the question remained, was she the broken teenager who slipped through the cracks of an uncaring system? Or was she still the cold, detached girl who once shrugged and said, "I don't like Mondays"? Chapter 7. The People Left Behind. When we talk about cases like Brenda Spencer's, it's easy to focus on the shooter, their past, their motives, their psychology. But what lingers most painfully are the lives torn apart by their actions. On that January morning in 1979, 2 men lost their lives trying to protect children. The principal who had stepped forward to open the school gates was killed in front of the very students he was trying to shield. The custodian who rushed in to help was also shot down. Their bravery became part of the story, but for their families it wasn't a headline, it was heartbreak. The principal's wife became a silent victim of that day too. For years, she lived in a house frozen in time. His clothes, his belongings, even the simple details of his daily life were left untouched, as if he might walk through the door again at any moment. She couldn't move forward because Brenda had taken away not just her husband, but her future. That kind of grief doesn't fade. It lingers like a shadow. And then there were the children. 8 of them were injured, their bodies marked with scars that would never fully heal. But perhaps worse were the invisible wounds, the trauma of being shot at while waiting to go into school, the memory of friends screaming, of teachers falling to the ground. Some of those kids carried that moment with them for the rest of their lives, shaping who they became, shaping how they trusted the world. The neighborhood changed too. Years later, Grover Cleveland Elementary was torn down, replaced with housing. But even with the building gone, the memory of that morning remained. A small memorial sign stands in the area, now a quiet reminder of what happened there. A reminder that no matter how much time passes, the scars of violence stay with us. As for Brenda's family, her father eventually died, his role in her life still clouded in controversy and unanswered questions. Her mother faded from the picture, completely distancing herself from a daughter she never claimed. Brenda, in many ways, was left with no one. But for the victims' families, that absence of accountability was just another wound. It's easy to analyze Brenda as a case study in neglect and mental illness. But when you hear the voices of the survivors, you realize something deeper. While she might have been a troubled teenager, the damage she caused spread far beyond her own broken home. Chapter 8: Reflections and Questions That Remain. When I think about Brenda Spencer, I don't just see the girl with red hair sitting at her window with a rifle. I see a teenager who slipped through every crack in the system, ignored by her parents, failed by the adults around her, and armed with a weapon she should never have had. But I also see the faces of the children who ran for cover, the families who never healed, and the principal's widow who still lives with an empty chair at her table. Brenda was only 16 when she pulled the trigger, and that fact raises questions that are hard to answer. Should someone who commits such a terrible act as a child spend the rest of their life behind bars? Or do we believe that young offenders can change, that decades in prison might transform them into someone different? The truth is complicated. What we know for certain is that Brenda has never truly expressed remorse. Even years later, her explanations shift. Sometimes she blames depression, sometimes drugs, sometimes her father. But what's missing is a genuine acknowledgement of the lives she destroyed. And without that, it's difficult to see her as someone who deserves release. This case also forces us to confront a larger issue: how many tragedies could be prevented if cries for help were actually heard. Brenda told people she was depressed. Teachers saw the warning signs. A probation officer recommended hospitalization, and still nothing was done. One decision from her father, one act of neglect may have set the stage for everything that followed. Today, Grover Cleveland Elementary is gone, replaced by homes and new families. But the shadow of that Monday morning in 1979 still lingers. It reminds us how quickly a life can spiral out of control, and how one person's choices can ripple through countless others. So, I'll leave you with this. When a child commits an unforgivable act, should their age protect them from a lifetime behind bars? Or does justice demand that some crimes, no matter who commits them, carry consequences that last forever? What do you think? That was the story of Brenda Spencer and the tragedy at Grover Cleveland Elementary. Cases like this leave us with more questions than answers. Was Brenda a victim of her environment, or was she always destined to harm others? Should the justice system treat a 16-year-old differently when the crime is so devastating? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Brenda should ever be released, or do her actions mean she should remain behind bars for life? Share your perspective in the comments. I'll be reading them. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to True Crime Echoes, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next case we uncover. Until then, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and remember, the echoes of crime linger long after the headlines fade.